three friends, who are all hobbits, enter an inn for the night. Stryker is a character that is, quite by design, misunderstood for quite some time. He's an enigma, a mystery. To some, including the innkeeper that we meet, he is a ranger, an uncouth and dangerous man that is barely trustworthy. As they travel with him, the hobbits come to see a different side of him. They understand that, while somewhat withdrawn, he is a loyal friend and a trustworthy guide, someone they can trust their lives with. But none of them, at least not till the big narrative reveal that comes a few chapters later, truly understand who he is. He is not actually Stryker, the ranger. He is Aragorn, the one destined to be king of Middle-earth and bring peace back to a land where that peace is less and less sure. The other views of his character were right. He is indeed a dangerous man, at least to those who would hurt his friends, and he is loyal and trustworthy. But none of them fit the truest picture of who he is until you understand his deepest identity, the king who is coming. Something similar is going on in our gospel passage today. John the Baptist is wondering if Jesus is the Messiah or not. John, who just a few chapters ago was joyfully proclaiming Jesus as the one who would come after him, is now in prison and doubting and wondering and wants to know just what kind of Messiah Jesus is. There are several reasons that might have led to this doubt, not to mention including the fact that he's in prison, and being arrested can make one question things. But it seems that the biggest problem John has is that Jesus doesn't look or act like John's idea of a Messiah. So John wants to know, is this it? Is this what all the Messiah is going to be? John was perhaps expecting a more traditional version of the Messiah, one that would come in and challenge the Roman Empire, that would overrule the oppressive systems the Jewish people were living under. But Jesus was not primarily that kind of Messiah. It was about something else, something that was confusing to his contemporaries, and is confusing to us today as well. Because we still wonder and ponder and ask, just who is this Messiah, and why should we care? And we still grapple with and find incomplete answers, though important answers. Some in our modern Christian world see the Messiah as the one who would be king and focus intently on the kingdom that is yet to come, on the coming of the reign of God in eternity, and the second coming of Christ. Others, especially in this congregation, and by others I mostly mean me, because I do this a whole lot, focus on Jesus as the bringer of justice and righteousness and shalom, the one that brings to the earth the greater vision, the greater dream of God's dream for our world. And these aren't wrong, but if we focus on them and say, to be the Messiah is this right here or this right here, we miss a broader point. Like the hobbits and the people of Middle-earth who looked at Stryker and missed Aragorn, we miss the deeper identity of who Jesus is, the one that makes all the rest make sense. We miss the idea of who Jesus is, that actually without it leaves the rest incomplete and empty. Let me pause just for a moment. Because I'm about to give you my thoughts on what it means to say Jesus is the Messiah, but as I've already alluded to, the church has been pondering that for 2,000 years. And far be it from me, really, to think that I'm the one who's finally figured it out after 2,000 years of church grappling and discerning and spirit work. So what I am about to share is not the answer, not the only way one might understand Jesus as the Messiah, but it is mine. To me, this is what it means to say that Jesus is the Messiah. It is to say that Jesus is the one who brings us closer and closest to God. To say that Jesus is the Messiah, in my opinion, is to say that Jesus is the one who allows us to see God face to face, to see God in ways that go beyond our imaginations. Jesus as the Messiah means that he is the one that shows us the love, mercy, and grace of God, and indeed incarnates them, who gives them flesh and makes them visible. Jesus is the Messiah, is God come to earth and living out God's love and grace and shalom in ways we can understand and see and experience. Because Jesus is the one that brings us to God. That, for me, is the kind of Messiah Jesus is. And that I mean when I use the word Messiah or Christ, which is Greek for Messiah. And to me, that makes all the other claims about Jesus as Messiah make more sense. Because none of the claims earlier in the sermon were wrong. John, even, was right. Jesus did come to overturn and challenge the Roman Empire. After all, one of his biggest projects in his ministry on earth was to establish a separate community, one that sought to live by the ways of God and not the ways of empire, one that sought to be separate from the empire in the world but not of the world, who sought to live by the ways of Jesus Christ and said no to the empire. And for 2,000 years, this has continued. By both the resurrected Christ and the church he left behind. Because when we're at our best as the church, then we also say no to empire. The empire of Rome and all the other empires that have laid claim to this world ever since have challenged and are challenged by the ministry of Jesus Christ. Because when we say Jesus is Lord, it means Caesar is not, it means our nation is not, our wealth or our leisure and our college football allegiances are not Lord. Because the Lord is Jesus, and our allegiance lies with him. But we say this about Jesus as Messiah, not just because, but because in him we have seen and experienced God. In him, we have met our Creator face to face and heard the voice of our God, and that is what makes Jesus worthy of our allegiance. That's what allows us to say Jesus is Lord. And that experience is what empowers us to challenge the empires of our world. It is true. The saying that Jesus is the Messiah means we have promises that go beyond this life. We have promised, as we talked with the kids on the steps, promised eternity with God. But it's not the promises that make Jesus the Messiah. After all, they go back all the way to the prophets. The prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos, were already promising glimpses of a new world with God. Jesus is the Messiah. Because in Jesus, we meet the one who gave those promises in the first place, and because in some unexplainable way, in Jesus, those promises are already and not yet fulfilled. It is undeniably true, and I certainly preach on it all the time, that Jesus calls us into works of justice, righteousness, and shalom, calls us into the ways of God. But it's not this call that makes him the Messiah. And Jesus doesn't offer us this call just because justice, righteousness, and shalom are intrinsically good, although they are. No, in Jesus as Messiah, we meet God and learn from his teachings the ways that God invites us into acts of justice, righteousness, and shalom. Jesus is the Messiah, not because of any of the claims we might make about what it means to our lives, except this: in Jesus we meet God. So why should we care? What does it matter what we mean when we say Jesus is the Messiah? If we trust that our eternity is secure and work to challenge the empire and work for justice, who cares if we fully understand what that churchy word Messiah means? Isn't what kind of Messiah is Jesus a bit of an academic question? A purpose to fill a sermon space on a Sunday in December? Perhaps. Perhaps our ability to live out our call as Christians matters more than our theology, and certainly more than our pastor's sermons. But I firmly believe that all this matters because we're at our best as Christians and as the church, and we understand our center. Because we're not called to be some social justice club or eternity assurance package or down with the man community. We're called to be followers of Jesus the Messiah, the one who brings us to God. We're called to come here to worship and go out and serve, not because it sort of feels like a nice thing to do, but because we have met God in Jesus Christ and experience our Creator in his life and his teachings and his death and his resurrection. Because that matters to us. We are followers of Jesus the Messiah. And we follow, we act, we love and live and share and forgive and do all that we do. Because in Jesus the Messiah, we have seen and experienced God. And for us, it has made all the difference. What kind of king was Aragorn? He was a king, and it shaped the reality and the narrative of Tolkien's story. What kind of Messiah is Jesus? He is the one that brings us always closer to God and allows us to experience our Creator each and every day. And because of that, we challenge empire and trust in eternity and work for the ways of God. Because of that, we say thanks be to God. Because of that, we follow him. Amen. Will you please join in our sermon hymn number 104.